There's another, as well as the media and politicians, there's a civil service, and you've just been you've been brought into a big story about the civil service. There's been a whistleblower named Anna Stanley, and this is pretty rare because civil service are under NDAs, so they can't speak out. She's come out, and she was made to do some sort of counter-terror training at King's College
in London,
in which not only are we told that she heard conversations where people thought the Prevent program was Islamophobic, but also your name came up along with your friend Joe Rogan.
Yes.
It seems to me that the civil service is another, call it the blob. In America, they've got their version of it, the deep state. How concerned about the civil service are you? Do you think that this is another sort of thing that needs to be taken apart?
I mean, it just needs a massive shake-up. And one of the big critiques that I and others have of the Conservative government is they've been in power for 13 years, and this has all happened on their watch.
Yeah, quite.
There was I mean, it's such a historic failure.
Can anything be done to change the civil service?
Oh yeah, I mean, of course you could do things. Fire people, fire a lot of people. For instance, I've said this before in print, but I want to know who let a man called Mohajerani, who was the former deputy prime minister of Iran. I want to know who let him into the UK in 2002. He is, by the way, the man who wrote the book justifying the Ayatollah's fatwa on Salman Rushdie. And he lives in Harrow, Leafy Harrow.
Still?
Yes, still. Yes, still. Now, first of all, that man should be arrested and deported. Salman Rushdie, one of our leading novelists in Britain, had another attack on his life 18 months ago. I don't see why Britain should be better capable of protecting the man who justified his murder than in protecting Salman Rushdie. I want the names of the officials who allowed Mohajerani into my country, and I want them fired and preferably prosecuted. I want the people who allowed in the Manchester Arena bombers' family into the UK to be fired and preferably prosecuted. I want names. Now, I'll tell you why. If this went round any other problem, there would be firings. Look at what happened with the Windrush scandal that suddenly became like the biggest story in the UK about some people who'd come to the UK, had lived in the UK long enough, should have had citizenship. The Home Office made a muck up about the whole thing, and it was a huge scandal. Everyone said heads should roll about it. Why shouldn't heads roll in the civil service over allowing in Hamas commanders? Who was it in the civil service? Who was it in the Home Office in Britain who allowed Mohammed Sawalha to get British citizenship? One of the things you're meant to do, he's a former Hamas commander in the West Bank, military commander, not one of the lovely welfare Hamas people. Who allowed Mohammed Sawalha to move to our country and to get citizenship when, among other things, if you sign to become a British citizen, you have to say that you're a person of good standing? You can't be a person of good standing if you're a military commander of Hamas. Who let him in? Why are these questions never asked by the media, by government, by the Home Office? So all of these Home Office officials and others, they muck up all the time in grand ways that lead to the deaths of British subjects on British streets. And they never have to pay. They have not yet paid once. It's in that context that officials from the Foreign Office, from the Home Office, from the Ministry of Justice and the Ministry of Defence are sent on a 3-day training course at King's College London, led by pseudo-experts. By the way, there's a whole... Are we allowed to swear?
Swear away.
There is a whole world of bullshittery around the so-called counter-terrorism area. And the man who defamed me and William Shawcross, who is the government's appointed Prevent reviewer, he is an example of it. These are people who they do this total horse shit. It's like this sort of social science nonsense where they, what are the steps to radicalization? Or there are 4 steps to radicalization. These are people, the man who defamed William Shawcross and Joe Rogan and me, he argued a little while ago in one of his little red articles that Islamist extremists are not motivated by Islam in any meaningful way. It's more about being lonely and things. Well, you know, I know a lot of lonely old women who don't become Allahu Akbar suicide bombers. I know a lot of people who seem quite lonely in Britain. It's amazing to me they don't all strap on a suicide belt. I don't know where you live in the UK, but I mean, there are a lot of people who feel left out. I bet if you went to certain towns in the north of England, you meet an awful lot of people who feel kind of left out. It's very striking they don't join ISIS, isn't it? I wonder why.
You know, when Winston asked Douglas Murray about what's happening with the centralized bureaucracy in England, or, what you folks across the pond call the blob. I love that. You guys have the blob. It's like the fourth estate that we have here in the United States of America, which is the bureaucrats, which literally are the functioning body of how everything begins implemented, from top down. And so if you want things to be, the wheels of government, they say can turn quickly or slowly depending upon what's happening at the bureaucratic level. And so this whole thing about the deep state or the fourth state or the blob is that have they become entrenched in this whole thing of woke culture? Have they become entrenched in DEI, or what I call DIE, the diversity, exclusion, inclusion, equity, and I like to call it diversity, inclusion, equity, because DEI must be DIE. We need to have DEI perish. DEI must die. But unfortunately, the bureaucrats have been become so infiltrated by the left and progressives and wokeism and political correctness. It's happening in everything, folks. It's happening in the armed services. It's happening in our DOJ. It's happening in the FBI. It's happening in your national health centers in England. It's happening at I'm sure MI5, MI6, all the state branches. You've got this infiltration. Look what they were talking about that was happening at King's College with this counter-terrorist unit. Can you imagine? It's just, how do you have the stupidity of people, the wokeness, to have people go in there and try to teach your civil servants and those people that are going to be tackling these issues of national security by giving them platitudes, by giving them the 4 steps to becoming a terrorist, all this kind of crap that's out there, not calling a terrorist, not calling an Islamist, not calling somebody a fundamentalist, man-made disasters instead of a terror incident. That's what's happening. It's unbelievable. And I'd like to take a few moments just to go to an article that was in the European Spectator that sort of shows one way of how you can sort of resolve or change a situation. So let's go to that right now. So here we have it here. It says, depriving the blob of its power and influence is a necessary precondition for national renewal. Now this is happening obviously they're talking, from you folks over across the pond in the UK. But he says, is it enough? Forget the democratic ethos of our age. The unpopular truth is that politics is a struggle between elites. Don't we know that, folks? Don't we know that? As George Bernard Shaw once put it, 2% of the people think, 3% of the people think they think, and 95% of the people would rather die than think. Given this rough breakdown, politics is bound to attract the most ambitious, highly motivated individuals within the first 2 categories, and more often, it must be said, the slightly higher number of people who think they think than the few who really do. No national elite, including our lamentable blob, can exist without such people, the genuine visionaries and the deluded chancers alike. In one sense, this is encouraging. It means that we do not need to convert every person in the land one by one to the cause of national renewal. Given the centrality of elites, it is just enough. It is just enough of a particular political outlet are bound to be influential in any period of history. Our responsibility is to make sure that they are influential in the right way. That's the key. Assuming a successfully bulldozed blob, how do we foster the patriotic elite, right, that will be required to replace it? First, and this is what happens a lot of times, we as conservatives dissuade, not purposefully, but we sometimes can make the future aspect so grim that maybe it lets the younger generation say, what am I going to get involved in then? If you guys are thinking that way, if pretty much it's all lost, what's the use? So we should not dissuade conservative-minded youngsters from entering our most pivotal institutions. Rather than bemoaning the existence of the modern administrative state, which we talk about, and the vast complex of intermediary bodies that feeds into it, we should marshal them to our own purposes. However, he goes on to say in the article that this will take a few courageous spirits willing to swim against a hostile tide. Eric Kaufman has suggested that we would benefit from the equivalent of what we do here from the U.S. Federal Society, an organization designed to nurture conservative talent and to encourage young right-wingers into the government bureaucracy, into schools, universities, and so forth. Better still, we should set the example set by Hungary. The governing Fidesz party has been willing to employ the commanding heights of political power. It's donated nearly 1.7 billion euros to the Matthias Corvinus Collegium, an educational institute based in Budapest, but now expanding across the rest of the country and beyond, most recently setting up office in Brussels. This MCC offers fellowships, stipends, and networking events as part of a far-sized strategy to cultivate a future elite of Hungarian patriots. It is not an indoctrination factory. There are teachers and students from both the left and right. He goes on to say he's seen this for himself. What they share is a commitment to the kind of old school values like freedom of speech, love of country that we used to cherish ourselves. He goes on to say in Britain, they should be sponsoring homegrown institutions which, following the MCC model, work to give the next generation a spiritual stake in the future of their own society. It's no use complaining about wokery among the kids if money that should be transmitting better values to young people with the talent to add to their nation's flourishing is instead earmarked to feather the nests of DEI bureaucrats and fund the shenanigans of activist groups operating in the guise of their Tory-enabled charitable status. Which basically leads me to tell you this, that on both sides of the Atlantic, here in America, this progressivism, this leftism, this wokeism, this virtue signaling, this political correctness has occurred on the watch of Democrats and Republicans, and dare I say the conservatives too. And it certainly has happened in England, folks, 13 years under the conservative Tories. So there's a lot of blame for this to go all around. Anyways, that's what we have on tap for you today. You've been watching the Dr. Nasir Shaikh Show. I'm your host, Dr. Nasir, where I give you my political prescription from my political perspective of what happens when you get Douglas Murray in an interview talking about government, politics, policies, culture, religion, the deep state, the blob, counterterrorism, and all that. Let's get back to more of the interview with Douglas right now.
So there's this whole scientization of terrorism studies, and it's really not that difficult. It's really not that difficult. And these civil servants get put on these courses. And of course, what really happens is they're all cowards. They're all led by cowards. They're all led by this horseshittery about, alleged counterterrorism expertise by non-experts. And they duck the Islamist one. And in fact, one of the striking things about Anna Stanley's whistleblowing was there was a girl in the Home Office who apparently on the course joked about the fact that her brother had joined ISIS. I reckon if there's somebody in the Home Office whose brother has joined ISIS, that person is also a security risk.
Mm-hmm.
Right, definitely. Definitely a security risk. But they gloss over the Islamist thing. They say Islamists aren't propelled by Islam or by their faith in any way. Nothing that could give that. It's all about being lonely or not getting exactly the job you wanted or not making the local cricket team or what they call the far right. This guy, this non-entity guy Newman, he was asked about Joe Rogan and me. And Joe Rogan, as you know, a very well-known far-right figure. He's a typical Nazi.
Like all those other Bernie boys.
Yeah. He's that Bernie Sanders supporting libertarian podcaster. He's planning the Fourth Reich if ever I saw one. Yeah. It's preposterous. And this idiot was asked by somebody, well, what do we do to suppress Douglas Murray and Joe Rogan? Because if you suppress them online, somebody said, then they've got large online followings. And the answer was, well, society will have to find other ways to suppress them.
What other ways?
Well, I regard that as being a pretty sinister threat as it happens.
Absolutely.
I'm a big boy, and Joe Rogan's certainly a big boy, and he can really look after himself. He's a cage fighter. But I would like to know what that means.
So would I.
What's the plan that this government paid non-expert? What plan has he got to physically suppress me? And if he doesn't mean physical suppression, what kind of suppression does he mean? It's the sort of thing you'd expect to hear in East Germany before the fall of the wall, not in Britain.
It's an implied threat.
It's outrageous. And I would like heads to roll at the Home Office and at the Department of Justice and at King's College London, by the way, which is in receipt of tens of millions of pounds from Qatar, which is also the funder of Hamas. I would like people to be fired. It's the same with these councillors in the north of England who all knew about the rape gangs. The police who all knew about the rape gangs. And very occasionally one of them will say, there was a woman in Leafy, Oxfordshire, had a rape gang of Muslim men raping young girls locally. And when that came out, the head of the council, who had previously been in charge of children's, policy in the Oxfordshire area, does a piece to camera where she apologizes. She said, "Very sorry for the breakdown in services in the Oxfordshire County Council during the years 2005 to 2015. We'd strive to do better." This sort of thing. You'd think it was somebody apologizing for leaves on the line on the Metropolitan line, not the mass gang rape of girls. For racist reasons, by the way, remember, for racist reasons. People who say they care about racism care about the racism that these girls were selected because they were white. But this is what we get in Britain. We get these weak, pusillanimous, never taking responsibility, overseeing things, and there's never a cost to them.
Same thing happens in America. Same thing happens in America.
None of them should have a pension. They should be hanging their heads in shame. But for some reason, they just glide along.
So Hizb ut-Tahrir have just been...
What Douglas is saying is so true. There's absolutely no cost to the civil servants. They can screw up, they can mess up, they can cost citizens their lives. They can put in policy that just absolutely causes turmoil, that causes absolute disparity, that causes destruction, that in some cases might even cause death. They make a mistake. There's no penalty. You can't sue them. There's nobody to go to. Who do you go to when a civil servant messes up? You call the phone number, nobody picks up the phone. There's no accountability at all, folks. None whatsoever. If they mess up, we tried. We were trying to do good. We messed up. We'll try to do better. Just like they said at the rape gang. For 10 years it was going on. Our heart's in the right place. We're trying to do the right thing for everybody. We're sorry. They could care less, folks. They could care absolutely. They don't give a damn about the people. They just want to be entrenched in their bureaucracy and their own little fiefdom, where they have their power, their control, and they have the ability to do so by implementing the policy, or the policy comes down, they decide that they change it, they tweak it, they move it back and forth a little bit. And to them, in their area, that's power. They're godlike in that structure, that power structure, that area, that dynamic. And unfortunately, it's happened under every administration. It's happened under every, political leaning, right or left. And unfortunately, we're the ones that elect, and these are unelected people. These are unelected people, folks, that have this kind of power to either fast track or slow track things that could be a benefit, slow track it, or things that would be a detriment, fast track it through the powers of bureaucracy and the powers that be at that particular time. Anyways, we appreciate you taking the time to watch. You've been watching the Dr. Nasir Shaikh Show. I've been your host. My name is Dr. Nasir. If you've done so already, we'd love for you to subscribe to the channel. You know what to do. Like, share, and follow us. Check out our other videos above and below. My final thought is always, when you're right, you're right. And when you're left, you're wrong. Until next time, folks, take care and stay safe.